Welcome back to the channel. I'm Roger. This is part 3 of my Farmertec MS880 assembly series. I'm going to get ready to put the rear handle assembly into the saw. So there are a couple of these big bushings. One goes in the front, one goes in the rear. Pop those in. Flip the saw over. There's a small bushing that goes in this side. Little trick is you can put just a little petroleum jelly on the bushing and it slides in easily. Stand the saw up on the end. This little bushing pops in there. So now we're almost ready to put the rear handle assembly on, except we need to add the intake boot and the impulse hose. I'm slipping the clamp on the boot. My clamp got ever so slightly smashed during shipping. So there's a groove on the cylinder for the intake boot to go into. Be sure you have it indexed properly. Now the last thing I need to do before putting the rear handle assembly on is the impulse. I put the clamp on the impulse hose. Now we are ready to put the rear handle assembly onto the crankcase assembly. Need to guide the impulse hose through. There it is in place. So now I'm ready to put some bolts in the crankcase to secure the rear handle. So I need 19mm self-tapping screws. I'm just going to start it for now, then flip the saw over and put the other two in. Then I'll come back and do the final torquing after I have all 3 of them started. I can now pop the dust plugs in since the screws are tightened. Since I'm here, the fuel tank cap can go on. So now the wiring grommets can be popped into the rear handle assembly. Already finished fishing the intake boot through with the ring inside of it. Put the wiring in the stop switch. The black goes to the switch. The green with the yellow tracer goes into the metal portion. Now this last AV bushing can go into place. There are two M5 by 12 millimeter screws that go in the bottom. An M6 by 40 goes in the top. Goes through that. There's what the bushing assembly looks like once it's completed. Before putting the carburetor on, be sure that your impulse is pulled all the way through the rear handle assembly, because there's like a grommet on the hose. So now the carb can go on. Okay, with the carb slid on, the fuel line can go on now. So now I'm going to put the throttle rod on. This end goes on the throttle side, like where you squeeze here on the saw. This end goes up in the carburetor. I'll show what it looks like once I'm completed. Now the choke rod can go on. This end goes on the master control lever. This end goes on the carburetor. So there is the choke rod. Back and behind there you can see the throttle rod. And then you can see how I routed the fuel line. I also did the fuel line. You need to make sure that the fuel line does not cause binding of the throttle or choke. So dust boot can go on. There's usually a cover that goes on the saws here. I don't see that. I don't know if it was excluded from my kit or it's just something that's not in the kit. So I can go ahead and put the air filter base on. I'm going to have to figure something out because I don't have a way for the air filter to seal without that base. Two nuts. I did put red thread locker on this stud and tighten that. You don't want that stud backing out. Falls down in the carburetor, you'd have a very bad day. This little stud goes in the cylinder. I'll remove the spark plug just to make putting on the top cover easier. These couple screws hold the top cover down. The air filter cover can go on. Time to put the bucking spikes on. I do need to take this inside side plate back off. And the spike slides through that. So we have a bolt that goes here and a bolt and nut up top. So I popped the chain guide out of the clutch cover. We have two hex-headed bolts that go in there. The bucking spike goes on the outside with two nuts. Now I've bolted the roller chain catcher on. The guide can go on, or the roller I mean. And I just had the clip. I usually just take a socket that fits. The catcher and push it down on. Now I've dropped the clutch cover into place. I'm going to put the muffler cover on. I never did do anything about the gap between the muffler and the bolts, so I'm not going to tighten it down ridiculously tight. We have these short bolts with the blue thread locker and then these lock nuts. This long fastener secures the brake handle and the final bolt of the starter assembly. That leaves me with the rear handle assembly to slip on. Well, there it is, completed and ready to run, except in my case I need to get that air filter base on there because I don't want to run it like that, at least cut with it like that, because I'll suck sawdust down in the engine. That's not good for the engine. You will have a rubber bushing left over. There's one on the rear handle already installed there, so that's just a spare part. Then you may have a few miscellaneous fasteners left over here and there. I didn't put the badges on, as I mentioned. I don't know if I'm going to write something on them special or what I'm going to do with that yet. I doubt I'll spend the money for the steel stuff. So thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Next video is going to be at least the first start of this saw and possibly the first cuts.